I used to have Paschke in my kitchen. I thought, my God, I paid a lot of money and I got a painting in my kitchen. What am I doing? But people would walk into my kitchen, they go, whoa, man, what is that, man?
And you pick up these guys somewhere and have a party with them, then kill them.
He's just like a typical dad, you know, does the typical things, and he's real normal and average and stuff. And then you'll see like a gun pointing at a Mona Lisa head on a canvas, and you go, ah, maybe there's something I don't know about him.
Tonight on WTTW Journal, Ed Paschke, the artist behind the mask. Hello, I'm Marty Robinson. On this WTTW Journal, you will meet a 51-year-old Chicago-born painter whose personal and creative lives are filled with ambivalent interests. One of those is his fascination with crime. Now, crime has been the foundation for intriguing novels, movies, and television programs, and in Ed Paschke's case, for art. His frequent visits to crime scenes provide artistic inspiration. In this program, narrated by another Chicago artist, Ken Nordine, Paschke introduces you to his world and what's inside it. Paschke, the artist behind the mask.
No matter what I've done in my life up to now, it's nothing, and it means nothing. You know, the mountain is still there to climb, and I'm going to take this first step today. I'm going to take the second step tomorrow. And that's the attitude that I begin each day with, is that whatever I've done, whatever I've supposedly accomplished, means nothing. And you've got to do it all over again. Anybody see a light green? So one of the hardest parts about working the room, so to speak, is that your materials are scattered everywhere, and then you might have an idea like, oh yeah, I just saw something to do over here. And then you got to search for wherever you dropped that thing the last time you were using it. But anyway,
Ed Paschke is an internationally recognized artist who's been painting in Chicago for some 30 years, since his graduation from the Art Institute. He's presently preparing for his one-man show at the Phyllis Kind Gallery in Manhattan. Just 10 years ago, his work sold for $7,000. Now his work brings up to $65,000. With an increasing waiting list from museums and collectors all over the world, it's no wonder his recent retrospective at the Pompidou Center in Paris was such a success, and why his paintings have such an effect on people.
When you see one of Ed's painting, he's implanted a ghost in you, and it stays.
It's not one of those paintings that is very subtle. It doesn't really just kind of hide in the corner. When you walk in, boy, oh man, we got Ed Paschke here, buddy.
And he's an artist filled with contrasts and contradictions in his life and in his art. He's peaceful and amiable. His canvases acerbic and volatile. The vibrant colors he uses to paint society's outcasts contrast sharply with his calm demeanor.
I guess you could say that on these paintings I'm working with certain ideas that are related to art history by, for instance, painting the Mona Lisa, kind of a Mona Lisa triptych, and then doing this Velázquez painting of his assistant Juan Pareja, and combining various aspects of the antique world of art history with updated things like those two guys floating, those are members of the New Edition, and kind of combining old and new aspects of culture, and also by transforming the colors as opposed to what they were actually painted in by the original author, bringing a kind of an electronic pulse of life to the painting that's part of, I think, contemporary culture.
In Paschke's 3 decades as an artist, he has depicted characters that bear little resemblance to his own life. His early intrigue with bizarre characters of underground performers and outsiders drew heavy criticism from both collectors and critics. Exploring new avenues, Paschke's work changed. His images became more subtle, while his message more powerful.
Paschke's message, I think, has remained remarkably consistent throughout his work, although the style of the paintings has changed dramatically toward a much more colorful, large-scale image. Paschke wants us to remain vigilant and cognizant of the impact which the media has upon our perception of ourselves and of our society and our culture.
When people first met Ed, after seeing his work, they never believed that that was Ed, because his work is so different than he is, than he looks. I mean, they were always shocked.
There's the inner self, and then there's the outer self. I think that's true of everybody, no matter if you're different or if you're mainstream or whatever you are. I think there's the private, internal feelings that we all have, and then there's the public masks that we present to the world.
Later exploration of the human condition compelled the artist to leave behind his realistic characters for abstract figures filled with hidden emotions of the outsider.
I think that ideas always come from the outside. I don't think ideas ever come from the mainstream. They eventually find their way into the mainstream, but I think that the perspective of the outsider, those who society in some way makes them feel different, and when you feel like you don't fit in, then you go about doing things your own way, and invariably that's where new ideas are given birth, is from the perspective of the outsider.
You want to know my dad's influence on me? The other day I cut this out of the paper. It's about Bubbles the clown strangling an 8-year-old girl. I got that interest somehow. I don't know how I got that interest, but...
Bubble? Clown?
I think it has something to do with him.
You're saying that my work has some violent overtones that influenced you?
Ed's fascination for crime began at an early age. He was painfully shy and immersed himself in the shadows, where his energies were used more for creating havoc than creating art.
When I was a teenager, I used to think it was kind of exciting to break the rules. I think a lot of teenagers do. I mean, it's a big part of growing up is challenging the authority figures of status quo and all that. And fortunately, I found a way to channel it into a way in which it doesn't really hurt anybody.
But Ed was not to leave behind his fascination with crime. He has a penchant for returning to murder sites. The mental recreation of gruesome events stimulates his artistic creativity.
A lot of times when people come to town, visitors, I'll take them on a kind of a crime tour and show them where different things took place. Turned in the alley. They apparently caught up with them. There's some gunplay, and this is the final resting spot of John Dillinger, right here on the cold, hard cement. He came out this door with these silver garbage bags, and I guess a whole series of them, because anyway, he dragged him over to this dumpster over here, and which is where the janitor noticed that the dumpster was particularly full, and he went out there to kind of rearrange the bags so he can get more in there, and he discovered a leg sticking out. And poking around further, he discovered other body parts, and one thing led to another, and then they gradually pieced together the fact that this guy Eiler, who was a house painter, apartment painter by trade, was doing this. And he'd pick up these guys somewhere and have a party with them and then kill them. And they have some kind of a system for scanning with infrared light the walls, and if there's any blood, it'll show up as a kind of a glow. They spray the wall with something. Well, when they did this to his apartment, it lit up like a Christmas tree. I guess there's nothing in there today, but keep my eye on it, just in case. History sometimes repeats itself. Somehow there's a relationship there between the act of breaking the rules of art and the act of breaking the rules of society. It's not to say that everyone doing 3 to 5 in Stateville is a creative person, but I think that there's an overlapping of those two in some way. I think we're all potential murderers, we're all potential perpetrators and victims of crimes, and it's just a matter of, you know, somebody hits a pressure point, somebody snaps, this is, you know, the last straw takes place. I don't know, I see myself interchangeably with all these situations, all these people, both the perpetrator and the victim of the crime as well. I suppose I admire people who take matters into their own hands like that. I think that there's a certain amount of courage that's involved there to do that. Just like picking up a brush and doing something that everyone else has always told you is something you would never do. You do it. I once had a teacher who told me, told the class that using purple was a very problematic proposition, and that you would very rarely use it, and you would certainly never, ever use purple with yellow. So that night, I went home, got out the purple and the yellow to see what would happen. You know, it's like something, you got to check it out.
Most recently, we've seen a series that was based solely on handguns, or guns of some sort. And I was very surprised to see that whereas Ed's work always has a large and appreciative public, this work became very off-putting in ways that his earliest pieces were. Suddenly, people backed off from them. The subject matter was once again becoming very threatening, as it had been to many people early on.
This exhibition that I had was about two central ideas. One was handguns and the other one was religion. And I saw them both as very interesting metaphors for good and for evil. I mean, I think you could go either way with both of those things. For instance, a gun is certainly an instrument for killing, and that's a kind of a bad thing in most cases, but sometimes the presence of a gun prevents something bad from happening. I think it's a symbol of something to go for good or evil. And much in the same way that religion is fundamentally a good thing, but every day you pick up the paper and you see some incredible acts of irrational violence committed by one group against another one in the name of, and everybody thinks they got the right religion, right? So I see religion as a metaphor that can go either way. This image, the Mona Lisa, is in a sense a kind of an almost religious icon, cultural icon. And by trying to merge the past with the present, and in a sense the gun is sort of like a way to explode the past.
Ed has 2 to 3 exhibitions annually, including this one at Playboy, for whom he has contributed work for almost 30 years. His feelings about exhibitions have changed over the years.
In the beginning, it was that whole anticipation and expectation that, is it going to be reviewed? What are they going to say? Are they going to hate it? Are they going to like it? And then over the years, you develop a certain, I don't know, maturity, I suppose, about that sort of thing. And sure, I'm still concerned about it, and you want to get some exposure and visibility, hopefully positive. But even if it's negative, as long as there's some kind of a response to it, the worst thing, of course, is a non-response.
I used to have Paschke in my kitchen. I thought, my God, I paid a lot of money and I got a painting in my kitchen. What am I doing? But people would walk into my kitchen, they go, whoa, man, what is that, man? What are we doing here? And it was great. I think that shock that you don't know, is that good or bad? Ooh, they don't know.
With Ed, you get the sense of the observer. That's what the great artist is. One who watches, assimilates, and redistributes the information that our culture gives us.
As a young artist, I became Ed's assistant, and I would help him stretch canvases, but Ed was generous enough to share with me where he got his information from. And it came from everyday life. It came from bars, it came from street images, it came from performers.
Paschke is inspired by the cultural images he finds in newspapers and magazines. He begins a painting by clipping and amassing those images that most attract him.
I'm looking for some kind of an entry point, some kind of a first step. The first step is like the ignition system in a car that kind of gets the whole process started. I have no idea what what kind of a painting this is going to look like. I'm just looking for a first step. Here's Humphrey Bogart as a little kid and as a sailor, and I started drawing his nose. Anyway, which leads us to the thing that I think I'm going to start now. There's a little still photograph from the movie Casablanca, the farewell scene. Here's to you, kid, and all that kind of thing. And there he is, and there's Ingrid Bergman. And so I've done a little drawing on here to alter it, to change it, to make it my own, to transform it in some way. I'm really struck by the stark, dark, and light information that's there. It's kind of a relationship situation. So what I'm going to do now is put this under my little trusty little opaque projector here. Got my canvas set up over there, and I'm going to see what happens. So put this on, and I get a sense of placement and what I want to work with. I might, decide to tip it on an angle like that. I was trained and schooled in the classic sense that you work directly from life, and every time I'd use the projector, I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, and I'd feel like washing my hands continuously after I used it to purge the sin from my being. But I got over that by realizing that the machine itself is a tool, just like a brush is a tool, and that's how you use it. And the fact that I engage myself in drawing on top of the source material anyway makes me feel that I have, in a sense, appropriated it in a personalized sort of a way, and process it, digest it, and send it back out into an altered form. This is all developed in black and white first. And so when I'm doing the black and white part, I'm not really thinking about color at all. I purposely try to erase any kind of color impulse from my mind so that when I do get to the point where I am going to introduce the color, it can be more of a spontaneous decision. Having done this for quite a number of years, it suddenly occurred to me that if you think about the evolution of the media that I'm working with in the first place, you have the invention of the camera, which was black and white first, and then later they evolved color. Movies, the same way, black and white was first, color was later. TV, black and white first, color later. So in a sense, the evolution of the media is consistent with the evolution of how my paintings evolve. And so it's a kind of a neat conceptual package.
As time goes by,
Ed's studio, like his art, is on the edge, in a gritty, urban section of town. It's a tremendous contrast to the quiet neighborhood of Sauganash, in which he lives with his wife and 2 children.
Coming from my studio to this is a pretty dramatic leap, but I do find that abrupt change stimulating.
Despite what his work might suggest, Ed's a regular guy, a dedicated family man, who teaches at Northwestern and enjoys spending time at home watching his vast collection of movies.
One of my favorite movies is Taxi Driver. For me, the film represents the perspective of the outsider, the individual, the loner, all of which describes, I think, the artist and society also.
This artist has developed a palette for the bulls and keeps in shape by shooting hoops with his son, Mark. While Ed's family life is rewarding and strong, there are some strains. His wife, Nancy, a former student at the Art Institute, suffers from Parkinson's disease. She talks about how it affects Ed's work.
I think a lot of the frustration and anger that is felt by the spouse is, in Ed's case, I think it's going into his work, and I think it's that is what's making, one of the elements that's making it so vital. I think we've talked about that for years. He's always felt comfortable. The only place he's really always felt comfortable is painting. If he had to go without painting for a week, he starts getting stir crazy. His idea of a vacation is painting. I think getting to a studio, he feels like it's a sanctuary, and his feelings, I think, are on the canvas.
I haven't really unraveled that too clearly. In fact, sometimes the mechanism by which you do something like this, if you see it, if you break it down and analyze it too completely, the magic goes away, so to speak. There's a lot of chemistry relating to that going into this work.
The only time he feels good is painting, and I think maybe if we hadn't had as many problems, his paintings wouldn't be as intense.
I've come to depend on it in a kind of psychological sense. You know, I need to do it. I've locked into this dependency factor where I always will need to do this. Paintings I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I couldn't do those now because I'm a different person now than I was when I did those paintings. But sometimes in going over them, you have a flash of recognition as to why you might have done something 10 or 15 years ago, and you didn't really know why at the time. But in retrospect, you can sometimes see things more clearly. So it's a very self-revealing process. I also see myself as a kind of filtration system, that as I go through my life and live my life, and as I am altered and changed by the conditions that I find myself in, so it is that my work changed correspondingly along with that. You know, there's an old saying that you should, in each painting, you should try to do something new in each painting, do something different, something new. And it feels awkward and uncomfortable when you do anything for the first time, whether it's riding a bicycle or anything. But the more you do it, the more it becomes an old friend. That's why I say that if you're working on a project and everything feels hunky-dory and comfortable, you should be a little concerned because everything you're doing is an old friend. It's an old decision that you've arrived at earlier. That feeling of uncomfortableness has to be there. One of the things you're always fighting is that as you get older and as you get more positive reinforcement for what you do, there's a tendency to not be as hungry, psychologically, and you have to find ways to trick your mind into having that sense of urgency, that edge that you talked about.
They're both, masks. They're not real. And they're also the TV images.
I'm especially fond of the hair pieces on the Cupids. They remind me of Liberace.
Shock, maybe. It just kind of makes you stop and think.
It's a pretty violent world, and it looks like it's just a bit of a judgment on what's here now.
I see openings as kind of an extension of what I do in the studio. It's sort of like a working situation in which all these people show up. It's kind of like Ralph Edwards on This Is Your Life. I usually sustain a certain kind of edge of nervous tension throughout the opening. It's like, work the room, work the room.
Hey, I saw your show in Paris just 2 weeks ago.
Great.
Yeah, just quote.
The two Eds.
The two American Eds, right? The two American, something like that.
Every single painting he does is a risk and also is about himself. We're talking about something personal, yet we're talking about something that is able to become universal because it is personal.
This is the first time I've ever looked twice at a Paschke painting. I usually pass them by.
Now the images are much more personal. You can get a lot more involved with them, and they're not mysterious. They're not in dark glasses or in hoods or covered large hats. They're more open.
Ed Paschke is an American painter. He represents now.
Speaking also as a painter, I've tried to get around flesh tones, period, you know, and there's red and green faces with yellow stripes across them, and they are very spectral, you know, kind of like the vision to see in an off-color television camera.
It's easy to get that jolt out of them when you come upon them. It isn't, oh, that again, or another one of those. It's that they retain that freshness, or what the hell is that about?
I would hope that Ed would give one of his paintings to me as a gift. Even though he doesn't know me, I'm a great admirer of his, and I think he might want to consider it.
I think the thing that motivates you to do the next painting is the fact that everything you've done up to this point hasn't quite done it for you. You know that you can do better. I know I can do better. So that's what my basic motivation is, to do the next painting or more paintings. And I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I'll say, push myself away from the art table and say, that's it, I've had my fill. I just get such a big kick out of doing this. I mean, it sounds like a weird, corny thing to say, but I really get a charge out of doing it. It's thrilling for me to paint.
Production funds for this program were provided in part by the Dr. Scholl Foundation.